Dakota, welcome to the Creators Copywriting Brigade. It's good to have you on. So you're just recently off the cuff of like an $11,000 deal. So talk about that for a second before we get into like why you love writing.
Yeah, I mean, money, that's why I love writing. No, I'm just kidding. Well, partially.
Yeah.
So yeah, I made a post recently, like last week, saying, hey, I was looking to take on a new client for LinkedIn, and then someone reached out, applied to work with me, got on a sales call with them, seemed like a good fit, pitched them on the thing, and had a follow-up call with him, and then yeah, he said he was down, and yeah, stoked. So 11K.
Wow. That's huge, man.
Yeah.
Is that the biggest deal you've closed, or is that like or is
No,
that about the,
35. I think it was 30 or 35K was the biggest one I closed.
holy crap, man.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's talk about like, the whole show is based upon like writing skills. So I'm going to ask you two questions. The first question is like, why do you love writing? And then we'll get to the second question after that.
Yeah. I love writing because it's critical thinking. You're forced to confront the resistance your mind will usually push on you. It sounds kind of
Right.
theatrical, but when you're thinking, it's easy to go thought to thought to thought. When you have pen to paper or your finger to keyboard, you're forced to flesh out an idea, make it cohesive, and make it so people understand. And I mean, touching on that, I think it's so cool that you can type letters in a specific order and create an emotion in the reader. And you can make people cry, you can make people laugh, you can make people take action. And I think it's the most impactful thing someone can do in their lives. One of the most impactful things, because in today's world, you could have a tweet go viral, you could have a newsletter be spread on the internet, and you can change people's lives at scale. Opposed to if I was to talk to somebody one-to-one, it's a lot harder to do that. But with writing, it's limitless. It's open to everybody. Like, sorry, dyslexic people, probably not as much to you, but it's beautiful. It's art, and it's art with impact.
It's really interesting because a follow-up question on that, like writing for emotions is like super hard. And it seems like a lot of people, what I've noticed like on LinkedIn, play it a little soft. Maybe they're worried about like, I don't know, depending on the person, maybe they like work for a company and they're worried about pissing off their leadership, or maybe if they're a newer creator, they're worried about ruffling feathers or like looking like an expert, and they might not be connecting like emotionally. So like in your words, like how do you connect emotionally? Is it through like your stories or through like just sharing something like vulnerable, or how do you do it?
Yeah, there's a really good book I like. It's actually a dating book, but I think it's a relationship book with people. It's by Mark Manson, and it's called Models. And the whole premise of that book is talking about vulnerability and how do you share yourself in a way. And it might feel uncomfortable when you share those vulnerable moments, but at the end of the day, that's what builds that connection, and not just with the opposite sex, but with your fellow peers and coworkers or whatever. And so everyone wants to be a thought leader, but they don't want to put themselves out there. They don't want to do the uncomfortable stuff. But that's essentially, what storytelling is. It's sharing those vulnerable moments, or talking about the times where you didn't have it all figured out, or your struggles and hardships. And yeah, at the end of the day, I think storytelling is what separates some of the best brands in the world. When you look at Nike, when they run ads, a lot of it's story based, whether they're not maybe telling you in a specific narrative verbally, but they're showing it with how the ad is laid out. And so what it does is it makes people identify with that story and makes them associate their identity with that brand. Like one ad that comes to mind is when that fat kid is jogging along a road, and he's obviously trying to lose weight, and he's just jogging, he's sweating, and that's the entire ad, if I recall correctly. And even that's a story, because obviously this kid's fat, he's trying to lose weight, he's trying to overcome this struggle, and he's pushing himself, and people resonate with that. And a story can be that simple, but just sharing stuff like that.
There's something to say about like the relatability factor, I think, because when people have it like all like buttoned up, it just doesn't feel as like natural. It feels a lot safer, I think, when people see that you started at one state and it became something completely different, and that struggle. There's something to be said about that. But the second part of this, like kind of the meat of it, What would you say like is like a favorite writing framework or some sort of technique that you've learned that you could pass on to other creators?
Yeah, one thing I think would be relevant to stories and what we're talking about right now is a framework I created called the Hero Framework.
Hmm.
And basically, there's 4 parts to the Hero Framework. And so there's HERO, hero.
Okay,
And so I like to think, the hero of your story and I don't know, stupid acronyms like that. And so
sure.
H stands for hardship. So this is more for if you're telling a shorter story on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever, but start with the hardship that you went through. And so whether it's, you used to be fat, you used to be broke, or even, you're trying to attain this goal, but you're facing some kind of resistance. It doesn't have to be this grandiose thing, but there should be some kind of hardship at the start. And that's what gets the story going. If you look at any
Hmm.
of the movies, any of the books, they all contain a problem. And that's what kicks off the adventure. There needs to be some sort of struggle. And
Hmm.
so the next part is effort. So what was the effort you took on to try to overcome that struggle? And so what actions did you take and what were you doing? Like, how did you try to overcome it? And so that kind of progresses the story. And then the next part is the R, which is the result. So from your efforts, what was the result that happened? It doesn't have to be good. It can also be a bad. It could be a failure. But what was the end result? And then finally, share the outlook, the O. And so whether it was a good result or a bad result, how did your outlook on life change from that? So I could have lost my legs. I wouldn't say that's a good result, but maybe like Lieutenant Dan from Forrest Gump, he lost his legs, but he changed his outlook on life, and I don't know, he like turned his life around. But what's the moral of the story? How did you change? How did your perspective shift through the hardship, through the effort, through the result?